Hello, everybody, and welcome to Calls. After 1 week off, the PGA Tour is back, starting a new season. This week, they are in Napa Valley, California, at the Silverado Resort and Spa, the North Course. It is, like I said, the start of a new season, so don't be confused by the title of the videos and the thumbnails. This is technically the 2022 season, even though these tournaments are played obviously in 2021. So this is going to be as always, these tournaments are part of the wraparound schedule that goes from, say, mid to late September to late August to early September of 2022 when the Tour Championships at East Lake. Speaking of the Tour Championship, no outright bets that I hit. Was pretty close on a couple. DFS was pretty successful. I hope you joined me in on that. The one thing that I kind of missed on, I think, pretty clearly was I recommended to stay away from Kevin Na. He ends up finishing third, so can't win them all. But I hope you enjoyed the success at the Tour Championship, and here we are. We're back for a new season. Going to try to start off on the right foot, build up some bankroll so we can spend it and lose it all. With that said, chat's open. Want to hear how you all did at the Tour Championship. What worked, what didn't. Did you just enjoy the golf? What have you been up to the last couple weeks with no golf? As always, statistics are provided by FantasyNational.com. A big shout out to Moose and Fantasy National. I won my season-long golf league with a bunch of friends. Made out pretty good and set a record for the most money made. So I'll try to bring up the couple of emails there and kind of show that to you. It was pretty fun acknowledgement there. But again, shout out to Moose and Fantasy National. Wouldn't have been able to do it without them. But enough of that. We're here for some golf. The PGA Tour is back. So let's begin our research for the new season at the 2022 Fortinet Open. And we're going to transition over here, make sure my camera is focused in. Had a little bit of issue with that right before I went live. Looks like it's okay. If the screen looks different or whatnot, let me know. I messed around with some settings. Hopefully is easier to read and easier for me to navigate. So if you're in chat, please let me know how it looks and so on. But for those of you who aren't familiar with my show and what I'm doing here, this is the kind of the home page of Fantasy National, and you can set different pricing things. So if you're not a DraftKings player, I'm exclusively on DraftKings, but I try to give advice for any daily fantasy service. Generally speaking, they will have say DraftKings, they'll have Yahoo, they'll have FanDuel, so on and so forth. I mean, you can even see that they have the Ryder Cup statistics ready for next week, which I had a long rambling intro. That's something else that I should have mentioned, that I will certainly be doing a Ryder Cup show. I don't know how much betting, if any, I will do, but I'll certainly go through some statistics for Whistling Straits and so on. If you all want to partake in that, I might just kind of take the week off from gambling and enjoy some golf. So, but here at the Fortinet, and again, I mentioned we are in Napa Valley, California, at the Silverado North Course. So Silverado has two courses. If you're doing your own research, make sure you look for the North Course at Silverado. The major thing that I should tell you if you're doing research is that the Fortinet is a new sponsor. This used to be the Safeway Open. So If you don't find previous tournament results for the Fortinet, look for the Safeway Open. And Fantasy National does a great job. They, of course, they have links and correct mapping to new tournaments and new sponsors and all that. As we normally do, I'm going to check one more time if the tournament fact sheet is out. It is not. So what I'm going to do is bring up last year's Safeway Open. It's the same course, still at Silverado Resort. The first thing you'll notice, it is a par 72 that is only 7,166 yards. This is a very, very short par 72. The greens are POA, which is very common for the West Coast. Typically speaking, the PGA will be in warmer climates, especially out west. As things turn fall to winter, in the East Coast, the Midwest, and so on, they keep it to warmer climates, obviously. So POA is very prevalent out on the West Coast. So we'll be looking at putting statistics for POA. The fairways are Bermuda, POA, and Rye. The rough is Bluegrass and Rye. The original architect for the Silverado North Course was Ben Harmon in 1955. But the bigger thing to look at is the redesign in 1966 by Robert Trent Jones. He's done quite a few courses, a couple of them that are used on the PGA, maybe the PGA Tour Champions now, Korn Ferry. Robert Trent Jones, maybe not necessarily as widespread as Pete Dye or Don Ross or Jack Nicklaus, but Robert Trent Jones has his hands in a fair share of courses that are used. But again, there's no green statistics, size of the green, number of bunkers, water hazards here, which I always like to use, especially the green sizes. That way how important proximity is and iron play and such. So I went through Pro Visualizer, just a quick run through, and I saw one water hazard on the course that affects one hole, and it's a par 3 that players have to tee over, cover or carry the water hazard in front of a green on a par 3. It's the only water I saw. The course looks pretty wide open, and not a lot of bunkers. I mean, obviously there's some greenside bunkers and your fairway bunker here and there, but looks like a fairly wide open course, and that would explain some of the scores that we'll look into here in a bit. But I always like to start the initial research with the fact sheet, and unfortunately the 2022 or 2021 Fortinet is not out yet. That'll probably come out tomorrow, so we'll look into that at the very beginning of the Data Dive show. But this just gives you an idea of how short this course is, and it's always good to be reminded, who the architect is, the green type, and such. So we're gonna close that out. Come back to Fantasy National here, and there are a couple of names that, to be quite frank, I did not expect. This is generally I don't want to say a weaker field. It's just a lot of the bigger names don't attend, and a lot of the Korn Ferry guys who just qualified, graduated to the PGA Tour, they like to get out to hot starts. So we'll definitely be looking at this filter here for the Korn Ferry, seeing who played the Korn Ferry well, because if they're exclusively on the Korn Ferry, they won't have any stats for the PGA Tour. But you need to look at it, because these guys now, they're coming out and they're competing. They're high on the leaderboard, and we certainly don't want to neglect to consider them just because we don't look at Korn Ferry stats. But just an overall thing here, like I said, a couple of big names. John Rahm is playing this week. Webb Simpson. You have Hideki Matsuyama, Siwoo Kim. Where'd he go? There he is. Sorry, let me scroll for you. I mean, Siwoo Kim's here. There's a couple of big names here. Mark Leishman's here. So it'll be interesting to see how guys get off, start of a new season. I'm going to shrink this sample. I mean, clearly, John Rahm for the past 50 rounds, I mean, he's number one player in the world. But I'm going to shrink this sample size to 24 rounds. That's usually my default, my go-to. And again, remember, so say someone like Dylan Wu, who was on the Korn Ferry Tour, he has 6 rounds. But if you include the Korn Ferry, when we sort, where'd he go? Dylan Wu. There he is. Dylan Wu has got 24 rounds. He was just on the Korn Ferry. So we're just going to look at the PGA Tour for now, and I'm going to look at the Korn Ferry separately. So tomorrow's data dive will probably be a bit longer and a lot more extensive. That's what I can guarantee you that. A lot more extensive. Hopefully trying to break out the PGA Tour guys and the Korn Ferry guys. But just looking at an overall for the last 24 rounds, no surprise here. John Rahm, number one. Kevin Na, who was absolutely in fuego at the end of the year. Third at the Tour Championship. He had a top 20 at the BMW. I mean, he top 10'd 2 of the 3 FedEx Cup events, top 20 the other, a runner-up at the Wyndham. I mean, these are very, very high finish. I mean, even the Travelers, he made the cut, didn't even particularly play well. I mean, his irons were pretty bad, not good around the green, which he's normally very, very good around the green. So, I mean, he didn't even play well by his standards and still made the cut. Then a second at the John Deere. St. Jude was successful, and then the just absolute hair on fire finish for Kevin Na. So John Rahm and Kevin Na, Hank Lebiotis, if you're a follower of this show, I've been touting Lebiota quite a bit. He might not be as mainstream as some people think about for golf. He didn't finish the year very well. He missed the cut at the Northern Trust, which prevented him from going to the BMW. But right before the FedEx Cup playoffs, I mean, he had a run there where he was just on fire, mainly with the putter. So I just rode that hot streak and was fairly successful doing so. So Stewart, Perez round out your top 5. Armour, Shank, Tringali, Hostler, and Hubbard are your top 10 in strokes gained total for the last 24 rounds. So that just gives you an idea of some of the guys that are here. Again, like I said, a couple of bigger names, which surprised me. But I think the most important thing for this initial research show, let's look at the course breakdown here. And like I said, it's a par 72, 7,100 yards. That is extremely short by PGA Tour standards. And as you can see here, you have a pretty easy course. There's a lot of green here. Meaning easy. So you have your par 5s. So you got a par 5 here. That's the easiest. I mean, that's a really short par 5, 537. There are some par 4s that are that long on the PGA Tour. So you got a par 5 here. You got the 15th, the 17th, and 18th or 16th easiest. So the 4 easiest holes clearly are the par 5s. You've got a somewhat drivable par 4 here. And then I think, so there's another one here, hole 8, that's extremely drivable. Sometimes this one can be. It depends on how it's played, if it's from the up tees, wind, and so on. But again, a very, very short course. But having said that, eagles are not extremely prevalent. They yield, a few. But if you're not birdieing, for example, this. I mean, if you're not birdieing the par 5s, you're losing close to a half a stroke on the field. So it's imperative that you take advantage of the par 5s. at least birdieing. You know, if you get an eagle, you might be stealing a stroke, but there's really only a small stretch here of the course that's real difficult, and that's at the beginning of the round. You've got a very difficult par 3 here, and then 2 par 4s that don't signify difficulty in length. It is the narrowness of the approach shot. I believe a couple of bunkers come into play off the tee, and then pretty well guarded for these 2 holes. But other than that, I mean, you're having a hit and giggle through here. You might hiccup once or twice, but I mean, this is a birdie fest. This is a birdie fest, as you will see in this chart here. When you have 21% birdies versus 13 or maybe 14% bogeys, that's on the easy side for sure, for sure. So again, this is here's a look at the course breakdown. Something that you should probably start looking into, and one of the reasons why I'm successful, if you do contests, at least on DraftKings, called showdowns, where it's only a 1-day tournament, especially on a day like Thursday and Friday, you can really gain a lot of leverage on people who are playing in that by focusing on stretches like this. So for those of you who play on DraftKings, you get bonus points for guys who birdie 3 straight holes. Well, as you can see here, there is a stretch here that is just, I mean, it's a cakewalk for these PGA pros. So, for example, you would probably want to target somebody who starts on the back 9. That way they hit this stretch. And even if they don't birdie this par 5, they still have a decent chance at it here. So, yeah, that's something to kind of take a look into. And again, in chat or social media or whatnot, feel free to reach out if you want to know more about showdowns. But that's something to keep in mind, that if a guy is, say a couple shots back, he can make that up very easily. So comebacks are very common here at Fortinet. When we look at the strokes gained by shot type, most often the approach is the highest, but putting is actually the most important stat here at Silverado. So definitely not akin to what I prefer in players. Again, for those of you who have followed me for a little while, know that I prefer iron players as opposed to consistently good putters, just because this is such a fickle statistic. It's volatile. It can come and go. Whereas generally speaking, someone like Colin Morikawa, Corey Connors, these guys are usually pretty consistent with their irons. So I much prefer this stat, but you can't overlook this. Putting is actually the most important strokes gained shot type here at Silverado. And you can see that in this chart too. The short game actually outweighs the ball striking, which very, very rarely happens. So a very big emphasis on a short game, on putting. And it's probably due to the fact that it's just an easy course. So if everybody's going flag hunting and coming up, 10 to 15 feet on their approach shots, who's going to make the putts? So that makes a lot of sense. I mentioned how you have to take advantage of the par 5s. You see that here. Most important stroke gain by hole, par of the hole, but it's not as high as I thought it would be. So it's a pretty even distribution here. Generally speaking, if you really have to take advantage of the par 5s, you'd have you'd have a bar up in here. So it's a pretty evenly distributed graph. I still probably am going to look a little bit at the par 5s, just because if you're parring those, It's not good, but it's a lot more even than I thought it would be. Just looking at the yards and difficulties and so on. Whole composition, you've got a couple of par threes that are shortish, one that's fairly long, one that's really long. But the most prevalent hole type is these 400 to 450 par fours. When we look into the strokes gained for that particular distance, we'll see how much that really plays a factor. And then you got three of the four par fives in this length. So again, we'll kind of take a look and see if these two ranges are a big factor in high finishes. If so, we'll want to isolate these two ranges for guys that we consider. The approach shot distribution, I always like to look at this chart. It's pretty clear. This is a wedge fest. It's short course. 100 to 125, 75 to 100, 125 to 150. And this is a wedge fest. So you're going to want to get guys who are really dialed in with wedges. Players like Zach Johnson. That's the main one that comes to mind. I mean, even Kevin Na. Good wedge players. So you definitely don't need to focus on the long irons. We'll look at some close proximity strokes gained. See who's been good there. The cut line, as you can see, historically has been getting easier. Fluctuating between even and -2, and -2 certainly on the easier side. And then last year went all the way to -4. That is a very, very easy cut, meaning the course is very, very easy. So the first statistic that's popping into my mind, and as soon as I kind of saw the historic cut line, the short course, first stat that came to my mind, we're going to look at birdies or better. You just have to take advantage of this course. The driving accuracy is lower here, and that explains this to a certain extent. People just don't, players just don't care about hitting the fairway. They're just trying to hit it as far as they can, get as close to the hole as they can. So driving accuracy, not so much, not so important. But you see distance here, a little bit, like about 3 yards or so more. So definitely going to look at guys who gain strokes in distance. And then greens, because this is such an easy course, much more likely to hit your green in regulation. And if you're not, the scrambling percentage is really good, or better than the average tour event. So here's your distribution of round scores. The most common is 70, so -2 for a round. 3 putts per round, though, is actually fairly close to tour average. It's just a little bit lower, or less common here. But having that so close means that it's not necessarily a gimme 2-putt. So that's also another factor as to why strokes gained putting is the heaviest statistic or shot type for strokes gained. So that's interesting to note. We might want to look at some 3-putt avoidance when we start doing some data models tomorrow. As I mentioned, driving distance, people just are trying to bomb it. The proximity, 28.5 here, 28 3/4 on the average tour event. So guys really aren't hitting it a lot closer, at least by this comparison. So a lot of interesting things to look at here. I'm excited for it. I'm excited to get into a new season, with football being the prime sport for obvious reasons at this time of the year. These are times where you can really take advantage and really dig into some data and gain a lot of insight, a lot of leverage for tournaments, later on in the year. Say early 2022 when you've been following this all fall and people are just coming back into it, you're going to be way ahead. So this is why I like to really hammer in on the fall, really pay attention, and you start to see guys who graduated from the Korn Ferry, get an idea on them. Let's look at the tournament history. This course has hosted the Fortinet, or the Safeway Open, now the Fortinet, since 2014. So you don't have to worry about any changes in course here or anything like that. So the players that have done the best here at Silverado, you've got Brendan Steele, who was a back-to-back champion in 2017 and 18. Chez Reavie, again, not the longest hitter on the tour. Brendan Steele isn't either. So you're starting to see guys who already there's a little bit of a common theme here. Length, you don't need a lot of length to win here. It can help, as evidenced by Cameron Champ when he won in 2020. Technically, he won in 2019, but the 2020 season. So length can help, but it's certainly not a what's the word I'm looking for? It's not necessarily a necessity. There are different ways to go about this course. So Brendan Steele, the back-to-back winner in 17 and 18. Chez Reavie has historically played this pretty well. Phil Mickelson's here this week. He played it very well in the years that Brendan Steele won. Has kind of fallen off, and let's just be honest, he's 51 years old now. Trying to compete with the young bucks, hey, all the power to him. But just being objective, being 51's a pretty big disadvantage. HV3 has played this pretty well. Chesson Hadley. Bill Hawes has historically played this very well. Now, missed the cut last year. He is coming back from some kind of injury, and if you are in chat or comment below if you know what injury that is, let me know. I know it is an injury. I don't know what type. Griot, was very close to making the Tour Championship. Harry Higgs was your runner-up last year. Has played this very well in the 2 times he's been here. Your defending champ is Stuart Sink. He is not in the field this week. This gives you an idea of some of the guys that have played this event well. And it'll be interesting to see how much overlap there is between these guys and guys who perform well on short courses. So that's definitely something we're going to look into in the Data Dive show tomorrow. Might touch into it a little bit here, but more so in the Data Dive. So if you just look at last year's leaderboard, like I said, Stuart Sink's your defending champ. He is not here this week. Harry Higgs was your runner-up. You had Reavie and Stewart. Doc Redmond played well. Knox, Hahn, Pat Perez, J.J. Spawn. Chesson Hadley's played well here. Sepp Straka. Gligic, I think is how you pronounce this. Tigala is a Korn Ferry Tour graduate, so starting his PGA Tour career or season. Brendan Steele as well. Let's look at the guys who don't, who are in this field and don't necessarily play it well. Chris Stroud, Max Homa, one of the the top players in the world. He's easily top 50, I believe. Just whatever it is, he just doesn't like this course. He's made the cut a couple of times, but very, very middling finishes. Same for Ricky Barnes. Ricky Barnes is 4 or 5 at least making the cut, but has not generally played this very well. Hudson Swafford, Bo Hostler, C.T. Pan, Brandon Hagee, just kind of going down the list here. So there's an idea of the guys who, for whatever reason, just don't play this well. And I'm certainly much more akin to take something like this into account. He had a fairly decent finish last year, Ricky Barnes, but 3 other made cuts that were at the bottom of the leaderboard and a missed cut. I'm much more akin to take this more serious, I would say, than something like, William McGirt, who's only played this one time. And then you got several people who just haven't played this event at all. Several people who haven't played this event at all. So I just like to see who has played this tournament well in the past, who hasn't. Some courses just, fit certain players' eyes, and some don't. And that's just, you kind of run into that. Let's take a look at the strokes gained from last year. Go into some specifics here. And see what really played last year. So, as you can see here, obviously, strokes gained total sorted by the leaderboard. Tee to green, no surprise, you got your leaders there. When you go off the tee, you don't have a lot of high finishes here. Certainly, Sam Burns, top 10. Bud Cauley was top 15. But you got to go down to Kevin Streelman here, and what's this, about 12th? Before you get a really high finish. Christopher Ventura, Higgs, Redmond, Spawn, Stuart Singh. So they weren't negative by any means. They were still positive off the tee, but it's not a direct direct correlation to a very high finish. So that was interesting to see. I mean, even Sergio, who was second on the whole field for off the tee, missed the cut. It's basically because he does Sergio things and was putting with his eyes closed. But so off the tee is not necessarily the most important factor. Approach, this is why I always like looking at or preferring iron players. Doc Redmond finished third, was the leading iron player. I mean, you've got a lot of high finishes here with a lot of strokes gained approach. So it's still going to be very important to hit your irons here. Around the green play, not necessarily the most important. You've got a couple of high finishes here: Christopher Ventura, Bhatia, Russell Knox, and guys certainly make the cut, but it doesn't translate to a high finish directly. But you're going to see the putting pretty much does. Tigala led it, top 15. Perez, top 10. A couple of, top 25s. 14th here. Now, Malnati missed the cut, but you'll notice, he couldn't do a fuck thing else that week. Couldn't hit an iron, couldn't get off the tee. He just made every putt, or made a lot of putts. But Ventura, Trahan, James Hahn, and you see the amount of strokes they're gaining on the green. So that lends itself back to that chart we looked at a bit ago, where strokes gained putting is just the most important shot type here at Silverado. Approach and putting. Let's look at the fairways and the greens. We saw that off the tee wasn't necessarily the most important statistic. And I said that guys here generally just bombed it because if the course is easy, why not just get as far or as close to the hole as you can? And certainly Sink was never known as a big hitter, especially as he reached the later year in his 40s and such. But he actually revitalized or reinvented himself and gained a lot of distance. You can see that here. But even in the top, maybe 20 or so, there's quite a few guys that aren't the longest hitters, and they had high finishes. So, so it looks like distance maybe isn't necessarily the most important. I'm surprised. When we looked at the course breakdown, you would have thought that because the accuracy is so low, that guys were just trying to hit it as far as they can, considering the distance is more than the average tour event. But apparently the guys that were playing well, it wasn't about distance. It necessarily wasn't the fairways. You had a lot of fairways in here. Let's sort by fairways. So you had, third and ninth, yeah. So I mean, the fairways were somewhat important, but the winner, Stuart Sink, you have to scroll a little bit for his fairways. So something to take into consideration. But again, it just doesn't seem like off the tee is very important here. Hence, Chez Reavie and Brendan Steele, they're not the world beaters off the tee. So a lot of ways to get around here. Greens in regulation, yeah. Stuart Sink, Russell Knox played well. Spawn, Hahn, Reavie, Stroman. These are generally your iron players. Makes a lot of sense. So greens in regulation could be something to look at. That's another statistic that I really, really liked looking at Eastlake. Because if you missed the greens for the Tour Championship, you just weren't going to play well. So that was a statistic that I was really focused on, and it turned out pretty well for me. Just take a quick look at the sand saves. Harry Higgs did well and finished high, and Bhatia, Sam Burns, Trahan. So, nothing that speaks directly that it's a focus. It's more the greens and regulation, fairways, not necessarily distance. Let's look at birdies and bogeys. And again, it was surprising to see that, considering how easy this course is, there weren't a lot of eagles. So the leader in eagles last year was Wesley Bryan, and he didn't even make the cut. But you had some guys that made a few eagles. Looks like they gained some strokes there, but your winner was way down here. I mean, you had a lot of high finishes here that weren't making eagles. But when you look at birdies, scroll up here, look at birdies, yeah. So, and of course you can argue, well, duh, if you're making a lot of birdies, you're going to finish high on the leaderboard. Yes, I get it, but sometimes eagles play a factor, especially on a course that's easy. So when I mentioned that birdies are better gained, was a statistic that I was going to narrow in on. I like to combine these two. Bogeys avoided. Yeah, okay. So let's start looking into the par threes here. So if you remember, you have two par threes from this length, 1 and 1. And apparently one of the par threes can play pretty long on a certain day. Since there were two at this range, let's see how that looks. So yeah, they were taking advantage of this par three, the two easy par threes. It looks like not necessarily a direct indication, but your winner, Chez, Harry Higgs was good. Streelman was good from it. Yep, so it looks like the par threes were a little bit of an indicator here. Yep, and then when it played long, yeah, you got a lot of high finishes here, I guess, on the day that it played long. So the par threes were somewhat of an indicator, I guess. Except for Christopher Ventura, most of these guys were positive or basically field average. So that's interesting. I'm more interested in the par fours and the par fives. If you'll remember, the majority of your par fours fell in this range here. But if you just sort by strokes gained par 4, you've got a few high finishes. I mean, Stuart. Yeah, I mean these are So you got a third, a 14th, 20th. Yeah. So it looks like strokes gained par 4 are a lot more indicative of who's going to finish high than par 3s. Let's look at this range here since it's the most prevalent. You had Vincent Whaley, who led top 25, Ventura, Hearn, Redmond. These two here didn't play particularly well, but were good on those par 4s. Chez, Stewart, Tagala, Burns. Okay. So, not necessarily a packed top end finish for those distance of par fours. You got a couple in this range. Let's see how this turned out. Yeah, you got a few tied for third up here. A lot of top 15. So 350 to 400 might be something to look at. 400, 450. Yeah, I'm more impressed by this one because you've got 3 of the top 5 and 4. 3 of the top 5 were top 5. The other one here was top 15. I mean, it's not like Bo Hostler missed the cut. I mean, it was tied for 23rd. Ledesma tied for 23rd. So I'm more interested apparently in this stat right here. Huh. Interesting. Let's look at the par 5s because we had 3 par 5s that fell in this range here. And if you'll notice, your winner, he was actually negative in the par 5s, which is somewhat surprising. Chez very, extremely negative in the par 5s. When you sort by this, so you Higgs, who was your runner-up, Straka, Percy, Burns, Knox, Bhatia, Trahan. So there's a lot of high finishes in this par 5, 550 to 600. A lot of high finishes. So definitely want to narrow in on this range here. Even though the winner was negative in this stat, this is a pretty good indicator of who's going to have a lot of success here at Silverado. This right here says a lot. You look in the top, what is this, about 8, 9 players, no one was worse than 23rd. Yeah. Yeah. That's something to look for. I know it says par 5. Or par 4. It is the par 5 efficiency. Let's look at proximity here. And when you notice the 3 majority of approach shots came in this range here. But again, the winner, Stuart Sink, was negative there, slightly negative and slightly positive. He actually made his ground on the long iron shots, which is surprising to me because most of the approach shots don't come from there. They come from in this range. So that's very interesting to see. Now, Harry Higgs was pretty good all across. His irons were just great last year. Chez was very good in this range, led to that. Brian Stewart's always very good with wedges. Doc Redman was great everywhere here. Ventura he didn't hit his irons very well. He was making a lot of putts. Sam Burns played well. So let's look at proximity total just real quick. Again, nothing that screams, this is the proximity total is something to focus on. You have a couple of high finishes, but the most, Jim Furyk, 46th, 36th, 52nd. So nothing screams like it did on the par 5 stat. You get the real short wedges. Again, nothing astronomical here. You had 2 of the top 5 guys just miss the cut. 100 to 125. All right, so that now we're starting to narrow in a little bit. You got a couple high finishes here. List, Furyk, and Stanley weren't great, but you got a little bit more. 125 to 150. Okay. Yeah. Griot, Norlander didn't play. Again, we're getting a little closer. So are we saying that the longer you're away you are, the better as an indicator? You've got a lot of high finishes here from this 150 to 175. 175 to 200. You got it a little bit further down, but not a lot. There's your first and second. The top maybe 15. You got a few others. 200 plus. Yeah. Huh. So it looks like proximity might not be the statistic to look for this week. If there is one, I would say 150 to 175, but even then, it's not screaming at you where first, second, fourth, eighth, and 15th are in the top 5. You've got some high finishes here, but again, nothing astronomical. I mean, Gellerman missed the cut. C.T. Pan barely made the cut. Oppenheimer, Anderson. So yeah, looks like proximity might not be the statistic to look for this week. Lastly, we'll look at putting as we go through the strokes gained leaderboard here. Strokes gained, putting. Who led the field last year? Tagala, 15. Perez was good. Hostler, Percy, Hadley. He actually had Malnati, who missed the cut. He didn't do anything else last year. So it's a pretty good indicator here. It's a pretty good indicator. That's something we're going to definitely focus on clearly when it's the most important shot type here at Silverado. Yeah, some interesting stuff there. Let's go back to this homepage here. Let's look at strokes gained putting as a general. You've got Stewart, Leviota, Hadwin, Johnson Wagner, and Kevin Tway are your top 5. Then John Rahm, Perez, Kevin Na, Tringali, and Sam Ryder are the round out the top 10. You have Troy Merritt, who was playing well for a while there. Tagala, we've seen a couple of times. Cameron Champ, actually, who's not known for his putting, has been putting better recently, apparently. Yeah. Historically, not a good putter, but he's been, well, it's all right, there you go. It's all fueled in that 3M Open win, 8.5. I just kind of write this as an outlier because look how many reds there are historically. So, yeah, I'm kind of writing that off. He had a good week. And that's what happens sometimes. That's why I don't like putting as a focused statistic. It's just so volatile. If we do go on POA, look at POA putting in the last 24 rounds, you get a couple of overlapping names, but you get some different ones here. So Kuchar, Blixt, McNeely, Hubbard, and Stewart. Then Rahm, Clark, Simpson, Potter, and Hadwin are your top 10. Leishman just outside. Snedeker, Nas up there high again. Homa is up here, so he's a good putter on POA, but not necessarily. Yeah, there you go. His best surface is POA by a good little margin here. Another thing interesting here, he is not very good when the round is easy. He plays his best when it's more difficult. Very interesting to see that. Very interesting to see that. So let's actually look at that now. We saw how easy this course is. Scoring relative to par. Let's just kind of look at strokes gained total. Again, tomorrow we'll really dig into the data and the data that I've shown. But when the round is easy, Rahm, Simpson, Tringali, Kazire, and Charles Howell are your top 5. Then Will Zalatoris, Kevin Na, Sloan, Moore, and Poston are the rest of the top 10. Matsuyama hangs around there. Stewart again. There's Malnati, Tigala again. So some interesting names here to consider. Let's look at short courses. Course length less than 7,200. And again, we're just looking at strokes gained total just to kind of get a feel for who's rising to the top of these leaderboards consistently. For short courses, you've got Webb Simpson, Siwoo, Tringali, John Rahm, and Hoffman. So a lot of overlap here. Simpson, Tringali, Rahm. Griot, Homa, Na, and McNeely are the rest of the top 10. So Na's popped on short. He's popped on easy. He's popped on putting. So, yeah. A lot of things to like here about Kevin Na. And why not? He's been on fire lately. You just hope that the week off didn't kill his momentum. But yeah, a lot to like here for Kevin Na. Let's see. There was one other thing I kind of wanted to look at, and now I'm drawing a blank. Let's see. Course length we looked at. We looked at easy. Well, now I've kind of lost it. Let's look at. Oh shoot! I always forget that it's tournament and then year. Well, if I could, it would help if I could type as well. All right, so there. This is what I wanted. Hitting fairways generally average. Course length, rough was average. Scoring relative to par was easy. It's interesting. Okay, so maybe it's not POA that we want to look at it because this is classified as bent. Interesting. So I like to see that. So there you go. So 2020 was POA. Hitting the fairways was difficult. That could explain why the fairways were just down, short that year. 2019. Okay, so this is all right. So it's good to see that you get some consistency here. So apparently hitting the fairways here is just difficult, and you want to maybe not necessarily bomb it as far as you can. So I'm glad I looked into this because these 2 years have been POA, but 2021 was bent. Very interesting. So this is POA, difficult. I think I'm going to still focus on POA. It's interesting because this was last year and they classified it as bent. So maybe the POA didn't come in or wasn't dominant. I'm not sure how that worked, but that's interesting to see. Let's just come back to this. What was it? There was one more thing I wanted to look at, but I think that might be it for tonight. Hopefully, we'll get some updated information. Actually, I'll check it one more time. Nope, still not there. So that's probably going to wrap it up for this. In the comments, let me know what you're wanting to look at in the Data Dive show. I've got a few ideas to look into. I just remembered I wanted to look just quickly at Korn Ferry guys, just very, very quickly. Strokes gained total. Zalatoris, Uline, Tyler Morris, David Yeager, Bramlett, Wu. Huh. Okay. And then so they don't really have any really, really short courses on the Korn Ferry. They do have some POA. Let's see that. Strokes gained putting on POA? Nope. Easy. Strokes gained easy for the Korn Ferry. Sig, Zalatoris, Woo's popped a couple times. Lovemark, Pendrith, Zinson, Uline, Mito. Interesting. Okay. Well, I'm sorry to have jumped back and forth there after I started to wrap up the show. I just remembered I wanted to look at the Korn Ferry guys. I'm going to swivel around here. Transition. So yeah, the new PGA Tour season starting. I'm excited. Coming off a pretty darn successful 2021. Let's see if we can get on the right foot. Try to make some money early in this year and increase our bankroll. That way we can just lose it all again. So that's going to do it for tonight. Again, in the comments, let me know if you want what you want to see in the Data Dive show tomorrow. And then reminder to tune in on Friday for the Week 2 rundown, where I will expose my 0-5 so far, depending on what the Rams are doing right now. 0-5 6-pick parlay. So it's going to be great. So make sure to jump in on that and give me the old Simpsons. I think that'll now do it for the night. If you are doing some NFL and if you're doing some early betting for the 2022 Fortinet, may all your bets be profitable.